afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Your Royal Highness, Yinka Shonibare CBE. Welcome to this afternoon at Moderna Museet. I will give a small introduction to the artist we are celebrating today. Yinka Shonibare was born in London in 1962. He grew up in Nigeria and then returned to the UK to study art and had an outstanding career since the early 90s. In 2019, Shonibare was awarded the decoration of Commander of the Most Excellent Author of the British Empire, or CBE, a title he has added to his professional name. And this is just one of many prestigious awards he has received over the years. He was shortlisted for the Turner Prize in 2004, became a member of the Royal Academy in 2013, and he is represented in several of the most important art collections around the globe, including Moderna Museet. Shonibare has participated in the Venice Biennial, in the Documenta 11, and in international exhibitions at leading museums worldwide. And his works, Nilsson Ships in a Bottle, was a 2010 fourth commission in London and was displayed in Trafalgar Square until 2012. Through painting, photography, performance, film, and sculpture, Shonibare uses citations of Western art history and literature to explore the validity of contemporary cultural and national identity within the context of globalization. We are very much looking forward to this afternoon's program. And this event is arranged together with the Princess Estelle Cultural Foundation, founded in 2019 on the initiative of Crown Princess couple. The foundation's purpose is to promote cultural activities in Sweden, and the initial focus is on establishing a permanent sculpture park in the Rosendal area, the Princess Estelle Sculpture Park. I'm very proud to be here in Stockholm and today present to you the artist himself, and I think Stockholm should be extremely proud to have the wonderful work by Yinka Shonibare at Djurgården area right now. First of all, I want to welcome a conversation between Yinka Shonibare, Lena Essling, who's a curator at Moderna Museet and has worked with Yinka Shonibare early on, and Sara Sandström, who's the executive director in Prinsessan Estelles Kulturstiftelse. So welcome to all of you, and let's give them a big hand.
Good afternoon. Well, thank you, Gitte, so much for kind words, and fantastic to be here together with Sara, and not least together with you, Yinka. And we just reunited after 18 years of not having seen each other, not spoken. And before then, in 2004 or 5, we worked intensely on projects together. And there is something about you in Stockholm, I would say. I mean, ever since Lars Nittve, the then director, invited you, he knew you from London. I think you knew each other. Yeah. And commissioned a piece for our entrances. It just sort of grew, and organically, the love in Stockholm that you sort of that generated around you was amazing. And I see that happening now as well with the projects you're doing. So there's so much to cover, and we're not covering everything you've done by far. We're focusing on the works you did for us, and of course, the new sculpture. And I would like to begin though by looking just at a couple of the earlier works and ask you to speak a little bit about them. Just for those of you who don't know the work so well, I'm sure many here are very familiar with the work, of course. So, as Gitte was saying, you have a background from both Nigeria and from London, and you have been so interested and so adapted to or so good at just catching those cultural and appropriational problems, let's say, mirroring them back at each other. And you started very early on to move into other people's work, not least the work of British painters and writers, and taking the roles. So here we see Diary of Victorian Dandy from '98, which is one of the photographic tableaus you did.
Yes.
And would you like to say something about that piece or that period?
Yes. Well, before I say anything, I just want to say, well, thank you for inviting me, and I'm really. It's just amazing to come back, after about 18 years, and also, some of you may know the projects I did with, Swedish television, and so, and of course the invitation, to do the sculpture here, so I'm very touched by this invitation. So thank you very much. So, and then about my works, well, when I talk about my work, I also have to talk about context. I have to talk about background and what was actually happening in the art world in the 80s and in the 90s. And so the issue of identity became a subject for many artists. So many of you may know about the works of Judy Chicago, Cindy Sherman, Barbara Kruger. And so it's important so when you talk about the work of an artist, you also want to talk about, what was happening at the time that the artist was actually working. So what were the main concerns? And at the time, I was actually very interested in what was happening, in Russia at the time, perestroika. And so I was making quite political work at that time. And then one of my tutors said, well, you're of African origin, aren't you? And he asked me a question, and that question has actually informed my practice as a whole since. So he said, so you're of African origin. Just to paint a picture here, so yes, of course, I'm of African origin. I grew up partly in Lagos, partly in the UK. But then I grew up watching Sesame Street in Lagos. So, and also, other parts of African culture was also very much part of my culture, Fela Kuti, the music and all of that. But then the question is, so he said, why aren't you making authentic African art? And I thought, well, nobody would really ask my English colleagues about making authentic British art. Would they make art about Morris dancing, or would they, what would that actually look like, in the contemporary world? So those questions then led me to, to then start to look at history and my relationship to the British Empire and the colonial relationship, and why do I have the hybrid identity I have? So I started asking a lot of questions. How should I represent myself in the world? So then, my work then became about, some might describe it, about the politics of representation. So then, the work that you see here in front of you is about my exploration of the politics of representation. So how do I represent myself? And so there are certain stereotypes about Africans, and I decided then that I would actually start to debunk some of those stereotypes, challenge them. And so the work is actually based on Hogarth's Rake's Progress. And, it's about I was also very interested in Oscar Wilde at the time. And so it's about the life of a Victorian dandy. And of course, juxtapose this kind of image with images of children starving in Ethiopia. So whenever you saw Africans being represented in the media at the time that I was making this work, Africans at the time were not represented in a good light. So, and then if you look at some of the, even Hogarth and many other paintings of the period, whenever you saw a person of African origin, they were usually in some kind of secondary role, either, the butler or the valet, so this is actually turning, again, I mentioned the idea of the politics of representation. So it's me actually challenging, how I've been historically represented. And this work is actually my first public artwork. So this work was actually huge posters on the London Underground in London, more than 40 stations. Now at the time, art was not usually on the London Underground, so it was a really radical thing to do at that time. And so in the pictures, we shot this in a stately home in the UK, and so we just spent time there about a few days with some actors, and we just got dressed and had our pictures taken. So we had a lot of fun doing that project. Yes. So what was the question again?
How to capture that? I'm not sure. I'm just loving this. So, but it's about around this time that you also go into working with the fabrics, and this is another representation of this painting then of Mr. and Mrs. Andrews, but now without their heads. So sort of
Okay.
also that.
Let's take the question of the fabrics
The
first.
fabrics.
Yeah, let's get that out of the way.
Check.
So I told you about this question of authenticity and what is authentic African art. And so after I was asked that question, I went to there's a market in London, so Brixton Market. And I was talking to them in the fabric shop about those fabrics. I grew up seeing those fabrics. I assumed they were authentically African, because since I've been asked to, search for my authenticity. So I went to Brixton to look for them.
Makes sense.
And so I was told the fabrics are, Indonesian inspired fabrics. And then batik was actually, originally from Indonesia, and then the Dutch industrially produced those fabrics and then tried to sell them in Indonesia. The market wasn't so successful there because they had their own. So then they tried West Africa and it was successful there. And so the fabrics then, after the period of independence in Africa, many African countries, kind of appropriated the fabrics, and so the fabrics are African textiles, but also the fabrics were also printed within Africa itself, so, and also in Europe. But I find those relationships very important. Those trade routes, Holland, West Africa, and Indonesia. So in a way, the fabric then becomes a metaphor for my own identity. And so, and that's why I use the fabrics, in my work. So, but then, of course, anyone who studied art history will know that, a lot of these kind of iconic works, you study them, and I, of course, I came across Gainsborough's Mr. and Mrs. Andrews. And Gainsborough's Mr. and Mrs. Andrews is actually at the National Gallery in London. But then I thought, wouldn't it be humorous? Because of course, I also studied the French Revolution, and as a young artist then, I couldn't really, I couldn't take anyone's heads off, because that would be a crime and I could go to jail. I didn't fancy that. So, but in my art, I can do that. Now, don't be too worried because it's just humor. It's parody. I'm not really thinking of doing that. So, but anyway, so. But anyway, as I was saying, in my work, I did this. So of course, the picture is called Mr. and Mrs. Andrews, and this is called Mr. and Mrs. Andrews, without their heads. It's a painting of a newly married couple with their estate behind them, and I've changed their clothes into African textiles. And so a lot of the works I do, of course, I'm dealing with very serious issues, but as as an artist, you ask yourself, how best can you deal with serious issues without alienating your audience? Because that's also very important, that if you actually want to engage people and you want people to pay attention to what you have to say, then you have to, and also you have to constantly make it interesting for yourself, because you don't want to bore yourself either. So okay, so can we see the next image?
Yes, next image. We're gonna have to be a little bit quicker with the images. I'm just gonna pass by this one, I think. This is another one after Fragonard, and many of you will have seen this at the National Museum recently. But since you were speaking of reaching the public, I thought we'd go straight to the entrance project, in fact. I think it's, you were invited to work, you were commissioned this piece to work with both our entrances, actually. The lower one, which nobody ever thinks about, and then the upper one, of course. And you made cool wall and warm wall with these folded or plied textiles, plisserade versions of this material, which was just extraordinary. But I think now, thinking about it and how you always want to reach your audience and lower thresholds and just speak to people, it's a wonderful thing that you work with entrances specifically. What do you remember from this project, working with?
Well, I mean, the work looks nice, and it feels like just a nice, colorful work.
Yes.
Well, it's actually institutional critique.
Yeah.
In your
face.
So it's an intervention into the museum, into the walls of the museum, and but of course you're attracted by it, and then you have to then ask a series of questions. Where did the fabrics come from? Why did the artist do that? Why? Where is the white wall? Where is it gone? Of course, the white wall being the cliche of the museum, but where is that gone? Where is that? So, but then if you look closely, but I'm also very interested in materials and texture. So the fabrics are actually pleated fabrics, and so there's so detail is also very important. And I think what interests me the most is when the form is an integral part of the content. And so for me, when the work becomes successful is when you can marry form and content. And then the form becomes the expression of the content. I don't know if that makes any sense, but but that's what I try to do.
This work was up for 4 years, I think, and it was really well loved. And I love the way also that you worked with the lower invisible entrance that's the most luscious, beautiful space, and these colors that you see behind here. It's just something that we really still speak about. And
and I don't know if Lars Nitzer is here.
Yes, right there.
Oh, thanks, Lars. Well, thank you for making me famous.
It was hard work.
Yeah.
No, but I joke about it, but Lars actually believed in me when this was before I was even nominated for the Turner Prize, and he just invited me and gave me the opportunity to do crazy things. So I really appreciate that, because we worked on a number of projects, but I imagine you'll talk about that, with the Versailles and so on,
Yeah, so when you were here working on the walls, actually, I remember this, we were looking out the windows, looking at the Vasa Museum and decided to go have a look.
Yes.
And I think everyone here has probably seen the Vasa ship by now. And of course you moved on, and we will look at this a little bit later, to Trafalgar Square, to the big commissions that are really well known, but it sort of started here. And this incredible piece of history, like this ship that sinks after just a few minutes in 1628, and of course tragically people pass away, but it's also the story of unfulfilled ambition, frustration, and it's also a moment that we celebrate with this huge museum across the waters here. That really moved you and sort of
I think when I saw this monument to failure, I thought it was so British.
Swedish.
I liked it immediately. And that's why, I wanted to make a work about it, because I thought it was just so great. I could identify with it. And so that's where the idea of Vasa came from, Vasa in a bottle. And of course, after making that Vasa in a bottle, which, you have here up now, I was kind of, when I got to the UK and I was invited to do, put work in Trafalgar Square on the 4th plinth. And of course, Nelson's column is there. And the whole story of the adventures of the British Empire was, if Nelson hadn't won that battle against Napoleon, I'd probably be speaking French now, or, and also that paved the way for the expansion of the British Empire. And so that's why I changed the sails into the textiles. But then I started to think about migration, the movement of people, travel, slavery, all those things. And then I also was thinking about the wind. And then that's when I created the idea of sort of, wind sculptures, because I then focused on the idea of the sails, but then shaping them in different ways. And so the first series I did, they were made out of fiberglass. And then, so the sculpture you have here now, that's the first sort of bronze one of the wind sculptures. But I was also thinking about form and thinking about actually creating the impossible, trying to sculpt wind. Of course, you can't sculpt wind, but you can sculpt the effect of wind. So it's also about, making the invisible tangible or the intangible tangible. And it's also about making heavy materials feel very light. So you've got the bronze, but then, it actually feels very light, or it's very heavy. So the illusion of lightness. So there are kind of other poetic things going on other than the kind of symbolic. So there are a few kind of abstract thoughts going on with the work. So that's kind of how the idea of the wind sculptures started, but the wind sculptures really started from the first series, the first one I made, which is Vasa in a bottle. And then, so we've come round in a circle to kind of, come back and then do, to see how the work has actually evolved over a period of 18 years and what they've become. I think we've got some wind sculpture images.
Yes, we're getting to the wind sculpture, absolutely, and we'll speak more about that. I just wanted to show this images when the ship is absolutely freshly finished, and it's not in the bottle yet, so you can still see the details even closer up. But it's just, as always with your work, so there's such beauty and such sense of, as you say, a sense of adventure, a sense of movement. It's really something that draws you in immediately. It's like a flame. It's beautiful. Anyway, let's move on. There's the back of the ship because the Vasa is such a gorgeous, overstated. Back to it. It didn't stay for long, but it was a gorgeous monument to all of these things. Right, and then because these projects were for the entrances, and then you were invited and commissioned a piece for the Fascination exhibition. And we contacted Swedish Television and ended up collaborating with them on this huge production. It just, snowballed into this wonderful, perfect storm, which was fantastic to work with, I must say. And you spent a lot of time here. We worked with choreographer Lisa Torun and many other fantastic professionals on this project. So, was this the first video you did, or how had you worked with moving image before this?
No, I'd never actually worked with moving image before. I mean, I did tableaus. And then, because I worked with Lena Essling a lot.
Oh, okay.
You were, because, you were working with me, like helping me while I was here. And I think that actually, when I was doing my research about Vasa, I came across the story of Gustav III, and I was completely fascinated by this because, of course, Verdi's opera was based on this, and I was fascinated by what happened, at the ball, and I wanted to recreate that, but it was such a crazy idea, and. But I like the fact that, you were not, you and Lass, you were not shocked when I said what I wanted to do.
We were, but we just kept a straight face. No, but then we managed to get other people to join.
Yes.
Forces.
And I was just saying to Lena earlier that, as a young man, I just didn't care about anything. I didn't realize, I was very brave because I didn't think about logistics or failure or money. I just left that to the museum to worry about it. And but I really enjoyed how that project came together because I didn't bring any of my team from London. I mean, I had there are people I used to work with in London then, and I just came here and met new people and just did everything from here. From the costumiers to the cinematographer to everything was all done, and you supported me in doing that. Even from the kind of choreography and the rehearsals and storyboards, and of course I must mention Easpis. They were fantastic.
Yes.
Because Easpis hosted me, and I had such a beautiful studio there as well. That when I went back to London, I couldn't go back to my terrible studio I had before. I had to change my studio. But so it was, I look back at this period really fondly, actually.
Yes.
I had such a good time making this project.
I mean, I think we as a museum were also exposed to an entirely new world of incredible professionals. I mean, this was SVT Drama, which doesn't even exist anymore so much, and they were the best of the crème de la crème, really. And it was one of their final projects. It was just really a big thing for them as well. And I think this was the first digital HD production they did, which was also very interesting and fascinating.
And I had a fantastic Steadicam cameraman as well.
Yes,
the really
cinematographer was
fantastic, great, and the cinematographer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was really, really good. And I had a camera on a crane as well, which was really fantastic.
There was some, look at that image there, it's just a big production. You don't even think about that when you see the work anymore, but it was really, really a big thing.
And the theatre is gorgeous. What's the name of it? You say?
Confidensen out at Ulriksdal, which is an amazing, amazing place. And we were so lucky to be able to be there and to stay.
And that was Gustav III's mother's theatre, right? Was that his mother's?
I would have to ask His Majesty. I'm not sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was. I think I heard it was his mother's theatre. But it was a beautiful, beautiful theatre.
Yes, Absolutely
Yeah.
gorgeous. And we will just have a quick look at some behind the scenes shots that we never showed but always cherished in house because they're just so we had so much fun. Quite simply, we were spoiled rotten. And then this piece, I remember getting the call that you had been nominated for the Turner Prize and had decided to also show this work in the
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was shown in London in the Turner Prize nomination.
yeah.
I didn't win though.
No, but but it was a great place for it to be. And it was really this thing about
I like to win.
I was trying to smooth things over. Okay. No, they should have, of course, let you win. Soon, it's 18 years now.
It was won by Jeremy Della, right? But
He's
every
also a
time I
nice guy.
see him,
It's a nice guy to lose to, though.
but it's all right. I survived.
Yeah. He might not. Anyway, so again, a beautiful story of shifts of power, of drama, and it's really interesting that you chose to give the title from the Verdi opera and not really from the Swedish sort of point in history, but that you sort of, again, mirror something via, I don't know, always very complex and lustful roots to follow in your work.
Yeah, but also, I mean, the significant thing about this piece is that there's no music at all. So even though it was named after a Verdi opera, but there was no music at all. So it was just the sound of people breathing, and then the sound of the bodies, landing on the ground, and which is also another thing I kind of enjoyed about doing that.
Yeah, it's one of the final shots. And with that, I would like to hand over to Sara so that you also get to talk about the new piece, which we want to know more about.
Yes, of course, we want to talk about the new piece as well. I just want to mention that this documentary, which Swedish television also made in 2004, will actually be broadcasted in July, the 7th of July. So you will have the opportunity to see this 1 hour program about Yinka's stay in Stockholm.
That's amazing.
And also on SVT Play. But now focus on this magnificent piece. We installed this work 2 days ago in sunshine. And Yinka, what can you say? You have now seen it at the site. What do you think about it when you see it in this?
I think it's beautiful, of course.
We do too.
Gorgeous.
Yeah, this is the third permanent work in Princess Estelle Sculpture Park. And we have been in contact for almost 2 years. And it will be inaugurated tomorrow at 1 by Prince Daniel. So please join us, everyone, at 1 o'clock. Hopefully sunshine tomorrow. You never know. Well, you have said a few words about what you think about this piece and how it has developed, but I think it's also quite interesting to talk about where it's placed, because this area, the Rosendal area at Royal Djurgården, it used to be a private property, but then it was purchased more than 200 years ago by King Carl XIV of Johan, and he demolished the fences, and then since then this area has been open for everyone, accessible, and today this area receives more than 15 million people annually. So what would you say is the biggest difference or challenge if you do work in a public space like this compared to doing something for an indoor venue like in a museum or a gallery?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that, how many million people again, you said?
15.
I think that's a lot of people.
It is.
Yeah. Yes.
Only for you know.
Well, I mean, I think the challenge to any artist, really, if you put work in the public realm, you have to think about access, and you have to think about how you engage with the public, even when you're dealing with quite complex issues. For me personally, I mean, access is very important. I think that I actually want people to engage with the work. That's why I do it. I don't want to create things that are so kind of complicated the public cannot actually have any kind of dialogue or conversation with me about it. And so, but at the same time, I don't want to, I don't want to lower my expectations of the public. So in a way, what I'm trying to say is, how do you make complex ideas accessible? So this is always my challenge as an artist. How do you make a difficult idea or a complicated idea so that you can actually, the public can have a conversation with you about that? And so, of course, if you look at these works, it's about migration, it's about movement, it's about abstraction, it's about culture, it's about identity, it's about the interrelationship between different parts of the world, Asia, Africa, Europe. But you don't want people to feel they have to read, a whole encyclopedia to know what you're doing. So you have to actually have a language that can hold all of those ideas, but hold the ideas in a non-pretentious way, if that makes any sense. So as an artist, the idea of the playful and how you can actually also express darkness without being literal. So there are elements of darkness, historical darkness, embodied in the work, but it's not slapping your audience in the face. It's more bringing them on a conversation. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? And then we can talk about it. But it's very important that you can actually engage with the work as a work of art. Because a work of art is not only a set of ideas. A work of art can also manifest formally. And so as an artist, I think you need to be then on top of your material engagement as well as the content, if that makes any sense, and this work, of course, is the first time I've worked with bronze, and of course there is a history to the history of bronze within the public realm. Historically, what did artists use bronze for? And there are lots of soldiers, equestrian, sculptures, statues, a means of expressing power. So if you then take something which historically has been used to celebrate power, if you like, but then you make that into something which is actually friendly, accessible, playful, but with somewhat dark undertones. So for me, contradiction and ambiguity is at the center of my work as an artist. It's not, I don't like didactic works. So, and within that sort of ambiguity then lies the concept of abstraction as well.
Yeah, and you say you want your work to engage people, and you certainly do. When we contacted you almost 2 years ago, and you accepted our invitation to become Artist of the Year 2022, I'm not really sure that you knew exactly what you were letting yourself in for. Because this project has also been snowballing and have resulted in many things. Not only this magnificent piece, but we are also collaborating with 13 institutions, all in all, not only the Moderna Museet, but other museums. There are parallel exhibitions, educational programs, etc. So people are really enthusiastic. And yes, Lars Nittve, you made him a superstar in Sweden, for sure. We will continue. No, but that's fascinating. I think we can take the next image, maybe. Yeah, we were talking about this before, the Trafalgar Square monument, which many of you might have seen. And as you said, this is like a development. Our piece comes from this, and it was born in the Vasaship, maybe.
Yes, no, I mean this piece, as I mentioned to some people earlier. So if you've heard this story before, don't be too bored by it. No, but I was actually saying in London that this piece, Trafalgar Square, is such a popular space, and taxi drivers, know this piece, and so they actually have conversations. We have debates in London taxis about art, and and so this is work that's kind of well known also internationally. But it's very interesting that the origin of the work actually came from Vasa in Stockholm. So that's also another opportunity that kind of started from here. And this work is now outside the Maritime Museum in Greenwich in London. So the National Maritime Museum. So they acquired this piece after that exhibition in Trafalgar Square.
Yeah.
So if you're in London and you want to see it again, you can see it at the National Maritime Museum in London.
Yeah, exactly. And Lena, I think we take next picture. This is also beautiful. This is from Yorkshire Sculpture Park.
Yes. So that's the kind of first series of wind sculptures, and that's made of fiberglass. Yeah.
Yeah, and we move on to next image. I visited you in your studio in December, and by then you were in the process of finding exactly the right color for the piece. And what made you choose these purple colors?
Yes, I expect you want it to be kind of really complex or complicated, but it's not, because it's just my favorite color.
It's really yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And you have also chosen the fabrics for the costumes in the dance performance that we are about to see soon. The dance performance made by Joakim Stevenson called Captured Moments. And this dance performance will also result in a film. It will not be at Ulriksdal, but at Drottningholm's Palace Theatre. And hopefully it will be shown at Swedish television. At least we hope so. Could you tell us something about how it feels to have a piece like this being inspired by a work by you, like a homage to your sculpture?
Well, I think that actually, can I give you the microphone? I'm going to make you speak. You must just tell us what sort of inspired you to make this piece.
All right, shortly. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Yinka. Well, what I got inspired by you was what you mentioned in the beginning, migrating.
Yes.
And I worked with the body parts, like you migrating body parts in your body.
Yeah.
To escape from each other.
Yeah, yeah.
And also this beautiful sculpture, which for me is like captured in the moment.
Yeah.
So really, it's a bit for me twirling somehow. The fabric is
a movement.
Movement, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
So one dancer worked with twirling and twisting.
Yeah, yeah.
And also the national and international identity that we are a hybrid. So having the dancers connect and see themselves in each other. Short and sweet. Yes.
Great, thank you. Fantastic.
Yes, and we also wanted to show some images of another dance work, Odile and Odette, if you would like to say a few words about this.
so after making such a big project here with so many dancers and actors, when I got back to London, I was approached by the Royal Opera House in London to make a project with them. And then I've always been fascinated by Swan Lake. And so I decided to do a minimal project, not with too many people. I needed a rest after that big project here. So, but it was minimal, and it was just two dancers, one black ballerina dancing against a white ballerina, and they mirror each other perfectly. And, it was so good, but also very complicated because the person opposite you has to do the opposite, because when you look in the mirror, you're not doing the same. Do you see what I mean? So they have to be the opposite. And the dancers were really, really fantastic, and they managed to do it. And also to create the illusion of the mirror, it's a very beautiful film, actually.
It is.
And so that's, and it's called Odila Nudette.
Odila Nudette. Yeah, I think there was one more image for this. And then maybe, Lena, I think we have...
Yes, I wanted to open up the floor to questions, but while people sort of gather their thoughts and look for a microphone that we will pass around for questions, I'm going to just ask you, would you say a few things about the new institute, is it, or residency that you are working on?
Oh, yes. So I just launched a foundation because when I was in London, I started... the whole thing actually began with I found that a lot of younger artists were having difficulties finding spaces to work because in London, things are very expensive. So as part of my studio, I created a project space called Guest Projects, which I ran for about 11 years. And so artists would be given the space to make work, and also artists could experiment without feeling the pressure that they have to sell something. And then I decided to actually form a foundation, which is Yinka Shonibare Foundation. And then, I've always been interested in bringing people together, finding ways to overcome, barriers, cultural barriers. And so and of course, I've got my origins in Nigeria. So I decided to build an artist residency space in Lagos. And Lagos is a very dynamic city at the moment. The cinema, thriving, music is big, Afrobeats and so on. So it's a kind of dynamic environment, and they have an art fair there as well. So I've built a residency space in Lagos, so we can have 3 bedrooms there for artists and a workspace. And we'll invite artists from different parts of the world. And we also have a 54-acre farm 2 hours out of the city, where we're actually practicing sustainable agriculture. And then we will be inviting researchers, curators, artists, writers. And we've just started our first residencies there now. We are working with the German Federation of Culture. We are collaborating, going forward with many, many institutions around the world. And we have a website. And of course, those who are, wanting to support us or willing to work with us, they're very welcome. We have a foundation director as well, Belinda Holding, and we have a website, which is the yinkashonibarefoundation.com. But I'm very excited about this because first of all, the architecture of the 2 buildings is just really amazing. And, on the farm, for example, we excavated the soil and made about 40,000 bricks, which we then used to build a house for the artists. Yeah, so, and then in the house in Lagos, we made sure that at least 75% of everything used to build the building are all local materials as well. And so, and then the house in Lagos is also a mixture of kind of modernist architecture with that traditional Yoruba architecture. So there's a courtyard and there's And that's something I'm kind of currently quite excited about.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So, any questions that we should? The Swedish. There, we have a question.
Hi, thank you so much for that talk. It was great. I run an art publication called Cult Bites, and I'm a curator. I'd love to come to Lagos. But yeah, that said, you were talking about representation in the beginning, and I was also thinking about the kind of sustaining or building cultural identity, especially when you're talking about the ship, the Vasa ship, and as this kind of monument to failure. Also with Gustav III and the film, I haven't seen the film, but I'm excited to see it. But when I'm thinking about that, it's also, you talk about the Verdi opera. So there's all these layers of this event, right? This event that happens in Sweden, that then it becomes an Italian opera, that then you again kind of bring to the Swedish public through this lens of the opera. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between this kind of building of cultural and identity? Does it make sense?
No, I mean, I think that, one thing that's, I think is always important is to always have control of your own narrative. So, you may have been historically stereotyped, but you have to take, I talked about the politics of representation. You have to take control of your own narrative, and you have to retell those stories from your own perspective. And so one thing that was quite popular with my generation of artists is the whole notion of deconstruction or deconstructing the grand narrative. And at that time, of course, an old-fashioned term now, but it was the time of postmodern discourse, postmodernism. So basically, I've always been interested in this idea of parody, and this idea that you take something which already exists, but you twist it around to, you remake it in your own way, from your own perspective. And of course, I like to take this kind of iconic narratives, or even like an art historical iconic image, so that, it's kind of like deja vu, you know it, but you don't really know it. Do you see what I mean? So you know the Verdi opera, but you don't really know it because you only know it from your perspective, but you don't know it from my perspective. So I can take that narrative and remake it. So that's something that I've always been interested in.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Manat Tamajani, also a curator in Viking, JK. But I wanted to maybe ask around, I guess still on the topic of politics of representation, right, which still persists. So I wanted to kind of ask around maybe your perspectives on, firstly, I guess the conditions for practicing art now, and maybe in the period that you mostly spoke about, and maybe how representation, how you see representation as a theme shifting, or, yeah, I hope that makes sense.
It's interesting you should say that, because when have you heard of a show called Magicien de la Terre? So before Magicien de la Terre, international art was basically Euro-American art. And, so this exhibition was done in Paris. And it was heavily criticized because artists from Africa, but who are not specifically artists, didn't describe themselves as contemporary artists, but of course they were artists in their own right. But they were kind of mixed with Western contemporary artists, and there was a lot of criticism then. But then there's a curator called Okwe Onwezo, who then did Documenta. And so Okwe then started to change the narrative, bring in art from different parts of the world. Now, I say all this because it's kind of interesting, because at the moment, the art market, the hottest works in the art market now are actually by Black artists, people like Kerry James Marshall, many others, Ibrahim Mahama. Simone Lee represented the United States, Venice Biennale. So I think that we are actually at a point now in history where when I was a student, it was a kind of struggle to present as an artist of African origin. I actually remember galleries in London at the time saying, well, we don't represent Black artists because we can't sell the work. I actually heard people say that. Now galleries are actually begging, Black artists to join their galleries. So it's interesting how perception can change. And of course, we've had Black Lives Matter, and I think that was a very tragic event, as you know. But I think that's also created another shift in culture, or how we actually think about things. I don't know if that actually answers your question, but broadly speaking, that's my answer to it. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm Dan. Yes, but I wanted to ask you regarding humor within your work, because even today, as you were presenting, it was quite funny, it was quite humorous, but you also deal with really dark ideas within your work. Yeah. So I was wondering if you could speak on the balance of humor without going over, like the difference between humor and garish, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I think that humor is actually, it's very powerful. It's a weapon. It's, as I think people are quite surprised that as a Black artist, I'm not angry. But why should I be angry? I'm from, originally from Nigeria, so generally when I was growing up in Africa, I wasn't angry there. So why should I be angry here? So no, I think it's just important to be able to laugh at the most absurd things, and that's actually, I think that's how you can actually really seriously, because humor is a serious matter. You can actually explore, a lot of things through that vehicle. But that's, I don't know if that answers your question.
I think that had to be the last question, I'm afraid, because we have such an exciting thing on the program for you waiting. So, Yinka, thank you so much for this conversation. You were so generous, always to the point, yet, so generous. Amazing. Thank you so much. And Sara, thank you for this collaboration, and amazing with the sculpture. And please let us know a little bit about what we're about to see.
Yes.
Change the stage.